Kenner, Louisiana, in the searing heat of summer, was a land where the omnipresent cicadas whispered ominous secrets to those brave enough to listen. Nathaniel knew this all too well as he traced the lonely dirt path leading to the swamplands, his seasoned gaze drinking in the shadow-dappled bayou, stretching out in somber silence. It was a world that thrummed with unspoken lore, and yet beneath the layers of the familiar lay something that spoke of uncanny darkness. Nathaniel, a man who bore the weary lines of age and battle scars of a lifetime grappling with bipolar disorder, moved with a purposeful stride, yet his generous heart bore the weight of a task not many would dare undertake. He was pursuing the scent of a story, an account that drew him in, not merely as a journalist, but as a man seeking retribution for his own unresolved past. He ventured into the Catfish Shack, the local watering hole, a cacophony of laughter, whispered secrets, and clinking glass. The patrons were locals, faces that wore their lives as open books, stories of hard labor and harder drinks. He pulled his hat lower, his introspective eyes taking in the sight before sliding into a stool at the end of the bar. "Nat, didn't expect you to show up here," grumbled the bartender, Marty, his burly arms resting on the counter. "I'm working, Marty," he replied, his voice an undercurrent of determination beneath the gentle murmur of his words. "What is it this time? Another gator sighting?" "No," Nathaniel leaned in closer, his voice lowering to a whisper. "Missing people around the mortician's office." Marty stiffened, his jovial expression dimming as the words sank in. "That's a hornet's nest, Nat." "I know," his response held a note of solemn acceptance. He had always been a man of fair judgment and quiet resolve. This new endeavor was no exception. As Nathaniel retreated from the bar, the night descended, casting a morose blanket over the stillness of Kenner. The world around him was consumed by the sibilant whispers of the swamp and the distant echo of the wind playing with the cypress trees. Yet his heart drummed a sinister rhythm. It echoed with the pulse of the town and the unspoken horrors hidden behind the mortician's door. The mortician's office stood like a gloomy silhouette against the moonlight. An icy shiver, untamed by the Louisiana heat, trickled down his spine as he gazed upon it. It was not simply a building, but a keeper of secrets, a harbinger of something abhorrent, just a step away from human understanding. Something was terribly wrong, and he was destined to unearth it, caught in the pull of an unspeakable truth. A haunting tale that continued to unravel, pushing him onto a path he could not retreat from, guiding him toward an insidious darkness that hummed with an impending dread. Nathaniel found himself standing before the austere facade of the mortician's office, the cryptic epicenter of the town's hidden fears. Its age-worn bricks bore a sickly pallor under the mournful light of the moon, giving it the impression of a monstrous crypt looming over the ordinary life of Kenner. With every step he took, a strange sense of trepidation clouded his senses. The air grew heavier, dense with the unspoken, as he pushed the oak door open and stepped into a world draped in shadows and silence. A chill, starkly contrasting with the heat outside, prickled his skin, a morbid greeting from a world resigned to death. He was greeted by the mortician himself, a man of a frail build, but with eyes that gleamed with an eerie, unsettling brightness. Harold, as he introduced himself, moved with a grace that was unsettlingly mismatched with his surroundings, his every gesture echoing an unnerving dirge. "It's not often we get visitors who aren't here for a service, Mr. Nathaniel. I'm here on account of the missing folks," he replied, his gaze meeting the mortician's, a silent battle of wills beneath the flickering light. The mortician's face twitched, a barely noticeable shift, but to Nathaniel's seasoned eyes it was as loud as a gunshot. The room, already tight with tension, seemed to compress even further. "I can't say I know much about that." Nathaniel paced around the room, taking in the array of strange relics and artifacts that adorned the dusty shelves. Amongst these, he noticed a peculiar symbol recurrently etched into the wooden surfaces, a convoluted, squirming glyph that seemed to shift and churn with a life of its own. "Mr. Harold, what's this symbol I see all around?" He pointed to the nearest carving, a prickle of unease crawling up his spine. Harold followed his gaze, his poker face wavering ever so slightly. "Oh, that's just an old family sigil. Bit of a superstition, really." Nathaniel mulled over the response. It was a mere tidbit, yet it snagged at his instincts, tugging him towards a much larger web of secrets that spun far beyond the confines of this mortician's office. Their conversation was cut short by an eerie melody seeping through the walls, a low, mournful hum that reverberated with an ageless despair. He felt it in his marrow, an uncanny symphony echoing from the town's heart and resonating with his own dark past. His resolve hardened. The tenebrous trail of the missing persons led him here, into this mausoleum of secrets, and he was yet to understand why. He parted with a promise to return, leaving the mortician in his desolate domain. As the door closed behind him, he felt an unnameable dread creeping under his skin, a silent sentinel of the horror he was inching towards. The town, its people, the missing, all seemed to be tangled in a grim tapestry, woven around the mortician and his cryptic office. The reality he knew was starting to crumble, hinting at a much more profound, cosmic dread, a horror that was yet to reveal itself. Underneath a sullen Louisiana sky, Nathaniel found himself standing at the brink of the bayou once more. The town, the bar, and the mortician's office were but distant murmurs against the melodic drone of the swamp. Yet a cryptic dance of shadows lay beyond the ordinary, a veil lifted only for those willing to confront what dwelled beneath. Haunted by the mortician's enigmatic sigil, he sought wisdom from Madame Leclerc, a withered crone living on the outskirts of Kenner. Her reputation as a purveyor of arcane knowledge was as enigmatic as the woman herself. "Madame Leclerc, I need to understand this symbol." He presented a hastily sketched replica of the disturbing glyph. His voice, though steady, betrayed a sense of trepidation. Her watery eyes widened as she glanced at the paper, a tremor rippling through her ancient frame. "That's a mark of the old ones, child, a harbinger of chaos from realms we ain't meant to know." His heart pounded a dreadful rhythm. A sickening realization began to unfold, bridging the gaps between the missing townsfolk, the mortician, and the ominous symbol. He was standing on the precipice of an abyss, an event far more sinister and incomprehensible than mere kidnappings. In the ensuing days, the weight of his discovery bore heavily on him. He grappled with echoes of rituals he stumbled upon, veiled beneath the town's mundane activities. Nightmares invaded his dreams, of cryptic symbols carved into flesh, chants that echoed from the core of the earth, and an entity looming in the ether of his consciousness. As his investigation further entwined with his personal torment, he found himself sinking into an abyss where reality blurred with madness. He was the eye of a storm, a maelstrom of cosmic horror that defied comprehension. The toll of his bipolar disorder, the manic intensity of his discoveries, and the depressive realization of his insignificance left him teetering on the brink of sanity. His generous heart now bore the additional weight of an unfathomable dread, the understanding of a reality far more grotesque than he could have imagined. And yet, with a quiet resolve born from the storm within him, he clung onto his pursuit. His motivation, a cocktail of revenge for the victims and a deep-seated desire for truth, steered him through the smothering fog of confusion. He had ventured far beyond the realm of the ordinary, treading into the shadows that lay beyond. An entity, a cosmic horror, seemed to lurk behind the curtain of his understanding, casting a monstrous silhouette against the backdrop of his sanity. The town of Kenner, once a tranquil backwater, was now morphed into a nightmarish tableau of terrors far beyond human understanding. The horrors that lay ahead promised an escape, not of relief, but of existential dread. For him, there was no turning back. The die had been cast, and he was now a puppet in a cosmic play, dancing on the strings of an unspeakable terror. Dusk fell over Kenner, veiling the town in a cloak of somber indigo. It was in this creeping twilight that Nathaniel found himself back at the mortician's office, the weight of his discoveries pressing against his resolve like a physical presence. Inside the grim edifice, Harold was awaiting him, a twisted caricature of a welcoming host in the spectral light. The air was heavy with a primeval anticipation, a morbid energy that seemed to bleed from the walls and permeate every corner of the building. "Nathaniel," Harold croaked, his eyes glittering with a nefarious, unholy light. "You've been prying into matters you ought not to." Nathaniel, mustering a quiet courage from the reservoirs of his soul, met Harold's gaze. "Perhaps," he conceded, his voice carrying the echoes of his unseen battles. "Or perhaps it's time these secrets saw the light." The confrontation was interrupted by a horrifyingly familiar melody, seeping in through the cracks, a symphony of despair and torment. Nathaniel's heart pounded a dreadful rhythm as the glyph, Harold's family sigil, seemed to pulse with an unholy life of its own, shifting and churning upon the walls of the room. He saw them then, emerging from the swirling chaos of the symbols, forms of the missing townsfolk, twisted and grotesque. Each figure seemed to be suspended between realms, trapped in an eternal torment, their silent screams ripping through the fabric of his sanity. Harold, caught in the throes of the ritualistic climax, turned towards the shifting glyphs, his form warping, dissolving into an entity far removed from any human semblance. His voice, a grotesque dirge, melded into the melody, solidifying the monstrous reality Nathaniel had uncovered. The revelation was as appalling as it was unfathomable, a cosmic horror that thrived on the fringes of human comprehension. This was not merely a tale of kidnappings, but a malevolent cycle of torment perpetrated by an entity dwelling within the mortician. Escape. The thought flared within his mind like a lighthouse in a storm. He turned, feeling the fabric of his sanity tearing at the edges, the world around him melting into a chaotic blend of his deepest fears and the monstrous truth. He ran, the screams of the ensnared souls echoing in his ears, their torment a grim reminder of the horror he had uncovered. His breath came in ragged gasps as he bolted from the hellish nightmare behind him, the reality he knew disintegrating with every heartbeat. Kenner was quiet when Nathaniel burst forth from the mortician's office. The cicadas drone a soft murmur against the chorus of cosmic terror still ringing in his ears. He staggered into the night, the reality he knew forever marred by the incomprehensible horror that lay beneath. He escaped from the physical confines of the mortician's office, not from the grotesque revelation of a cosmic horror. A man bound by his pursuit of truth and retribution, he was left scarred, standing at the boundary of his sanity, forever haunted by the shadows of the inescapable. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed our content, show your support with a like and subscribe, and stay notified by hitting the bell icon. Expect more cosmic horror from Eldritch Tales Factory, and feel free to explore our other stories. See you in the next video.